Mercedes-Benz just built something that doesn't fit neatly into any category, and that's exactly the point. This is the 2027 Mercedes-Benz VLE 400 4MATIC. It is Mercedes' first vehicle built entirely on a brand new electric architecture. It's got a screen in the roof bigger than most people's TVs. It can outglide an S-Class, and depending on how you spec it, it might make more sense than a six-figure luxury SUV. Mercedes doesn't even want to call it a minivan. Internally, they've floated names like Grand Limousine and Elegant Multi-Purpose Vehicle. I'll just call it what it is, a full-size luxury electric people mover. And today, we're breaking down everything about it. The design, the tech, the performance, what it's like inside, how far it goes, what it might cost, and yes, at certain points, how it stacks up against the vehicle a lot of buyers in this price range are cross-shopping, the Cadillac Escalade IQ. Not because the VLE is trying to be an SUV, it isn't, but because that's genuinely where a chunk of these buyers are going to be cross-shopping their money. Let's get into it. The VLE rides on Mercedes' new VAN.EA platform, van electric architecture, and this is the very first production vehicle to use it. That matters because it means Mercedes didn't just take an existing SUV or sedan floor and stretch it into a van shape. This thing was engineered from a blank sheet specifically to be a one-box, space-maximizing electric vehicle, and it shows the moment you look at the proportions. It's a big vehicle. Depending on which wheelbase you choose, and yes, there are two, you're looking at a length of just over 209 inches on the short wheelbase, or almost 216 inches if you go long. For comparison, that long wheelbase version is pushing close to 18 feet of Mercedes. Width comes in just under 79 inches, and height is right around 76.5 inches, so this thing has real presence on the road. Tall, wide, and long, but shaped in a way that keeps it aerodynamically efficient, which we'll get into when we talk about range. Up front, it's unmistakably a modern Mercedes EV. Rounded fascia, a ridged hoodline, an illuminated oval-shaped grille opening with an illuminated surround, and a thin horizontal light bar tying the headlights together. The taillights are triangular with these star-pattern lighting elements that light up almost like jewelry at night. Very deliberate, very look at me, which is a little unusual for a vehicle in this body style, honestly. Minivans have historically tried to disappear into the background. This one doesn't want to. The VLE is built in Vitoria-Gasteiz, Spain, and it replaces the old Mercedes EQV in Mercedes' lineup, but undersells it, because the EQV was a repurposed commercial van. This is a ground-up luxury product. And if the VLE isn't opulent enough for you, Mercedes has already teased an even more expensive Maybach version called the VLS, which is expected to push past $200,000 when it eventually lands. So the VLE you're looking at today is actually the more attainable end of this new family, which tells you something about where Mercedes sees this segment going. Let's talk about what's actually happening underneath, because the 400 4MATIC badge on the back means something specific. The VLE launches in two configurations. The base VLE 300 is front-wheel drive, single motor, and makes around 272 horsepower. But we're here for the 400 4MATIC, the performance flagship of the lineup, at least until an AMG version shows up down the road. The 400 4MATIC adds a second electric motor at the rear axle, turning this into a proper dual-motor all-wheel drive setup, and total output lands right around 416 horsepower. Now, 416 horsepower in a vehicle this size doesn't sound like a supercar number, and it isn't trying to be. But here's the thing. Mercedes claims a 0 to 60 time of 6.4 seconds for the VLE 400 4MATIC. In a vehicle that can weigh north of 8,000 pounds and carry up to 8 people, that's a genuinely quick number. It's not going to embarrass a performance sedan, but it will absolutely surprise anyone expecting minivan-grade acceleration. Top speed is electronically limited to 111 miles per hour, which again is not the point of this vehicle, but it tells you Mercedes gave it real performance hardware, not just a badge. What's arguably more impressive than the straight line numbers is how the VLE rides. It comes standard with 4MATIC air suspension, and Mercedes engineered a custom rear shock setup specifically for this platform. The shocks are tucked in on either side of the rear motor so they don't intrude into the cargo floor. That's a genuinely clever piece of engineering, because it means you get a fully flat load floor without sacrificing the benefits of air suspension. You can also adjust the ride height on the fly, lower it to make stepping in and out easier, or raise it up if you need extra clearance, like fording a flooded parking lot after a storm. Early reviewers who've driven it, including Rob's Report and Edmunds, who both got seat time in Spain ahead of the US launch, described the ride quality as the VLE's single strongest trait. Smoothness, in their words, is what this vehicle does best. It's isolated, it's quiet, and it soaks up rough pavement in a way that a taller, heavier SUV on a stiffer platform often can't match, because the VLE was never designed around off-road capability or towing. It was designed around comfort. Now, let's talk about what powers all of this, because this is one of the more advanced EV platforms on sale in 2027. The VLE uses a new NMC battery chemistry, that's nickel manganese cobalt, with a usable capacity of 115 kilowatt-hours. That's a big battery, and it's paired with an 800-volt electrical architecture, which is the same high-voltage approach you'll find in vehicles like the Porsche Taycan or the Hyundai Ioniq 5. It allows for dramatically faster charging than the older 400-volt systems most EVs still use. On the range side, Mercedes is citing a WLTP estimated figure north of 700 kilometers. That's around 435 miles for the lineup, with the single-motor VLE 300 landing at the top of that range thanks to its lower power draw. The all-wheel drive VLE 400 4MATIC will land somewhat below that peak number simply because it's got a second motor to feed, though Mercedes hasn't published a final separate WLTP figure for the 400 specifically. And EPA numbers for the US market haven't been certified yet. Those typically come out closer to launch and tend to be more conservative than the European WLTP cycle. Still, even accounting for that gap, this is shaping up to be one of the longest-range electric vehicles in its class in any body style. Charging is where the 800-volt system really pays off. The VLE can pull in more than 300 kilowatts on a DC fast charger, and Mercedes says in about 15 minutes at a high-powered charging station, you can add up to 335 kilometers, around 220 miles, of WLTP range. That's a coffee break charging session getting you most of a tank back. There's also an optional DC converter for compatibility with older 400-volt fast chargers, so you're not stranded if you pull up to a station that doesn't support the faster 800-volt speeds. And Mercedes is baking the software experience into the charging story too. The VLE integrates directly with the Mercedes-Benz high-powered charging network with built-in reservation functionality, so you're not rolling up to a station hoping a stall is open.
Now to the interior and technology. This is where the VLE stops feeling like a van and starts feeling like something closer to a private jet cabin. Up front, the dashboard is dominated by Mercedes' MBUX superscreen setup. This is the same philosophy you've seen on cars like the EQS, but adapted here. Under a single continuous glass panel, you get a 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster for the driver, a 14-inch central touchscreen for infotainment, climate, and navigation, and an optional second 14-inch screen on the passenger side, so your front passenger can control media or navigation without ever touching the driver's controls. It's a clean, screen-forward cockpit, and it runs on Mercedes' new MB.AOS software platform, which supports over-the-air updates, meaning new features can show up on your VLE the same way an update lands on your phone without a dealership visit. But the real party trick is in the back. Rear passengers get their own dedicated 31.3-inch panoramic display that's actually built into the roof and retract when you're not using it. This isn't a small drop-down DVD screen like the minivans of 20 years ago. This is an 8K panel that supports split-screen operation, so two passengers can technically watch two different things at once. It streams video, it runs games, and it's got an integrated camera for video conferencing. So if you're using this as an executive shuttle, someone in the second row can genuinely take a work call on screen from the back seat while the VLE glides down the highway. And Mercedes clearly thought about the small stuff too, based on early hands-on drives. There are heart rate and breathing sensors built into the cabin specifically to detect if a child or a pet has been left behind. If it senses someone's still on board after the vehicle is locked, it'll automatically kick the climate control back on to keep the cabin at a safe, comfortable temperature. There's also an integrated UV air purification system for the cabin air. These aren't headline features, but they're the kind of details that tell you this vehicle was engineered by people thinking about how a family or a chauffeur or an executive would actually live with it every day.
Let's talk about safety and driver assistance. Mercedes is loading the VEL with a full modern driver's assistance suite. Expect adaptive cruise control, lane keeping and lane departure warning, lane change assist, forward collision warning with automatic emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, and rear cross-traffic alert. Under the hood of the software is MB Drive Assist Pro, backed by a sensor array Mercedes describes as 12 sensors total, including 5 radar units and 10 cameras, plus a full parking assist system to help you place a vehicle this size into a tight spot. Given the size and weight of this thing, remember, we're talking about a vehicle that can tip the scales at well over 7,000 pounds. That kind of sensor coverage isn't a luxury. It's basically a necessity. And because MB.OS supports over-the-air updates, it's reasonable to expect Mercedes will keep refining these systems after the vehicle is already in customers' driveways.
Now to practicality and versatility. This is the VLE's home turf. Because it was designed from scratch as a dedicated electric platform rather than adapted from a combustion vehicle, the floor is completely flat. No transmission tunnel, no battery hump intruding into legroom. That opens up a level of interior configurability that a traditional SUV, even a very expensive one, simply cannot match, because an SUV still has to work around a taller platform, and in Escalade IQ's case, a body-on-frame heritage. Depending on configuration, the VLE seats up to 8. You can run it with a pair of individual captain's chairs in the second row for maximum comfort on shorter trips, or configure it for higher passenger capacity when you need to move more people. And because of that flat floor and the tucked-away rear suspension design we talked about earlier, cargo space doesn't get sacrificed the way it typically does in 3-row SUVs, where the third row usually eats directly into the trunk. This is a vehicle built around the idea that rear seat passengers matter as much as the driver, maybe more. It's less family hauler with cup holders and more traveling private lounge, which is very much the direction Mercedes wants people to associate this with.
Let's talk money. Mercedes hasn't published final US pricing yet, but the expectation, based on early reporting, is that the VLE will start somewhere in the neighborhood of the mid to high $70,000 range, positioning it competitively against Mercedes' own GLE crossover. Fully loaded, with the biggest wheelbase and top-tier options, it could climb well past 6 figures. But the entry point looks like it's aimed at buyers who'd otherwise be shopping a well-equipped 3-row luxury SUV, not a Rolls-Royce. Which brings us to the Escalade IQ. Cadillac's full-size electric SUV starts right around $130,000 and climbs to roughly $150,000 for the top premium sport trim. For that money, you're getting a genuinely powerful machine. 680 horsepower standard, up to 750 in Velocity Max mode, a 0 to 60 time under 5 seconds, a 205 kilowatt-hour battery good for an EPA estimated 460-plus miles, and a massive 55-inch curved OLED dashboard that's become one of its signature features.
On paper, the Escalade IQ wins the numbers game in a few key areas. It's quicker, it has more outright range, and it carries the brand cachet and road presence of a traditional full-size SUV, which matters to a lot of buyers in this segment. But here's where the VLE starts to make its case. Even in its most loaded configuration, the VLE is realistically going to undercut the Escalade IQ's starting price while offering an interior experience that's arguably more thoughtfully built around rear seat comfort. That flat floor, the retractable roof-mounted screen, the individual captain's chairs, the video conferencing camera in the back. The Escalade IQ is built to be driven and to be seen. The VLE is built to be ridden in. So which one's better really comes down to what you actually want the vehicle to do for you. If you want maximum power, maximum range, and the visual dominance of a traditional SUV silhouette, the Escalade IQ is going to win that fight every time. But if your priority is rear passenger comfort, interior flexibility, and getting more of that flagship Mercedes experience for meaningfully less money, the VLE 400 4MATIC makes a genuinely strong case. And that's before you factor in that faster 800-volt charging architecture, which the Escalade IQ also has but doesn't quite match in outright charging speed.